I was making the drive back home from a business trip that had taken me across 3 states. The last stretch was the longest, 8 hours through mostly empty roads, my only companions being the occasional 18-wheeler and the static-filled sound of talk radio. I had been on the road for hours when the exhaustion began to creep in. My vision blurred slightly at the edges, my head felt heavy, and my hands gripped the wheel a little too tightly. I wasn't in the mood to stop at some rundown roadside motel, though. I just wanted to push through, get home, and crash in my own bed. The clock on my dashboard read 1:47 a.m. when I saw him for the first time. A man standing on the shoulder of the highway, his hands at his sides, his head tilted slightly as if he were watching me. He was dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned gray suit, something from the 50s, slightly disheveled, his tie loose, his face obscured by the shadows. As I passed, his head turned to follow my car. I nearly swerved off the road. My heart hammered in my chest. I shook my head, blinking rapidly to clear my mind. Just fatigue, I told myself. I'm seeing things. But 10 minutes later, there he was again. Same suit, same stance, same eerie stillness. I slammed the brakes before I even realized I was doing it. My breathing was shallow, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I turned, expecting to see him shrinking into the darkness in my rearview mirror. But he was gone. Nothing. No sign of anyone. Just the empty stretch of road and the hum of my engine. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out every rational thought. I didn't understand how he could have disappeared so fast. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I needed to stop for a coffee or... A sharp tap on my passenger window made me scream. I jerked my head to the right, expecting to see him standing there. But there was nothing. Just the cold, empty night. I punched the gas and peeled away. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark, the trees on either side standing like silent sentinels. My mind was racing. I needed to pull over, get some air, maybe check my car to make sure I hadn't hit something in my dazed state. About 10 miles down, I spotted a roadside gas station, one of those 24-hour places with flickering neon lights and an out-of-date sign that looked like it hadn't been changed in years. I pulled in, parked under the bright glow of the overhead lamps, and took a deep breath. The clerk inside looked half asleep when I went in to grab a cup of coffee. He barely acknowledged me. I paid in cash, filled my cup, and stepped back outside. That's when I saw him. Standing under the gas station sign, his shadow stretching unnaturally long across the pavement. His head tilted, just slightly, as if studying me. I felt my stomach drop. It was the same man. A strangled breath escaped my throat. I backed up toward my car, fumbling for my keys. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react at all. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. The gas station lights flickered once, just a brief moment of darkness, and when they blinked back on, he was gone. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, forcing my breath to steady. This isn't real. I'm just exhausted. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, I froze. Because this time, he wasn't outside. He was in the back seat. I screamed and twisted around, ready to fight, ready to... Nothing. The seat was empty. I was losing my mind. My hands were still trembling when I forced the key into the ignition and peeled out of that parking lot. I kept checking the mirror, waiting to see his reflection again. But there was nothing. Just the road. The long, empty road. I drove in silence, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The exhaustion had turned into something else now. Something primal. My skin felt electric, like I was on the edge of some terrible realization. Then, I heard it. A whisper. So close it felt like someone's lips were right against my ear. You shouldn't have stopped. I screamed and swerved, nearly careening off the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. My hands shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip on the wheel. The whisper was inside the car. I turned, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But again, nothing. The car was empty. My hands clutched the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I had to get a grip. I had to get home. I forced myself to start driving again, this time gripping the wheel like a lifeline. The next hour passed in a blur of static and headlights. I was barely holding myself together, my eyes darting to every shadow, my skin crawling with anticipation. I knew I was being watched. I could feel it. Then, finally, I saw the lights of a small motel up ahead. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to risk it. But I knew if I pushed on much longer, I was going to crash. With shaking hands, I pulled into the parking lot. The sign flickered, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. There were a few other cars parked outside, their windshields fogged up from the cold. I grabbed my bag and hurried inside. The night clerk barely looked up as I paid for a room. I took the key, my body screaming for rest, my nerves stretched so thin they might snap. I shut the motel room door behind me, turned the lock, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The room was small, old, but functional. A single bed, a TV, a faded armchair in the corner. I tossed my bag onto the bed and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, I half expected to see him behind me. But there was nothing. Just my own reflection, pale and hollow-eyed. I let out a breath and turned to leave the bathroom. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The closet door, which had been closed when I came in, was now slightly open, and from the darkness inside, I swore I heard breathing. I froze in the dim light of the room, the closet door's gentle creak echoing in the silence. My heart pounded in my ears, and I struggled to convince myself it was just the wind. Yet, deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I edged closer to the closet, every instinct screaming at me to run, but fear rooted me in place. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the door open a little further, half expecting to see the same ominous figure from my drive. Inside, the darkness was unnervingly still. I could just make out the silhouettes of old coats and boxes, relics of a bygone era. I squinted, straining my eyes, until something caught my attention, a photograph, lying face down on the floor. My trembling fingers brushed against it. I flipped it over and gasped at what I saw, a sepia-toned image of a group of people in the very same motel lobby. In the center, a man in a gray suit, his expression somber and unreadable. The date scrawled on the back read 1932. At that moment, the overhead light flickered, plunging me into a brief darkness before sputtering back to life. I blinked, and the photograph was gone. My pulse hammered as I backed away from the closet, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me. I told myself it was a clever prank by someone, but the chill crawling up my spine suggested otherwise. I tried to shake off the unsettling discovery and made my way back to the bed, every creak of the old wooden floorboard amplifying my terror. The silence of the room was suddenly shattered by a series of soft knocks at the door. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The knocks repeated. 1, 2, 3, each one measured, deliberate. I pressed my back against the wall, heart in my throat, as I crept toward the door. I peered through the peephole. Outside, in the murky light of the corridor, nothing seemed amiss, just the long, empty hallway of the aging motel. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold, a flash of the same gray suit, as if someone was lurking just beyond the light. I pressed my trembling hand against the cold metal of the door, ready to bolt if necessary. The knocking ceased abruptly, leaving a void of oppressive silence. Then, in the distance, I heard a low, raspy voice calling my name. It was barely audible, as if coming from somewhere deep within the walls. I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the room or from the corridor outside. I slowly backed away, returning to the bed and pulling the covers tightly around me. Sleep, I reasoned, would be my salvation. But sleep did not come. Instead, a series of faint, deliberate footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my room, each step measured and deliberate, as if someone was stalking the corridor. The footsteps paused right outside my door, and I could hear a breath, a long, slow exhale that seemed to merge with the hum of the ancient building. The door handle rattled gently. I lay motionless, every sense on high alert, my eyes locked on the door as I waited for the inevitable intrusion. Suddenly, the door burst open with a violent shove, and there, standing in the narrow doorway, was not the mysterious man from the highway or the gas station, but a person I recognized, someone I never expected to see. It was my own reflection, not as I remembered it, but as a pale, gaunt figure with deep, hollow eyes and a twisted smile. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so fiercely that I could barely breathe. The figure stepped forward, mirroring my every movement. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat as the figure's cold hand reached out. In that heart-stopping moment, the lights in the room dimmed even further, plunging everything into a murky twilight. The figure's lips moved, and I could just barely make out the whispered words, "You're not alone." It wasn't just an echo of my own thoughts. It was as if my reflection was speaking directly into my soul. Then, with a sudden jolt, the world spun around me. I was no longer in the motel room. I found myself in an old, abandoned version of the very same room, its walls peeling, the furniture covered in dust, and the air heavy with the scent of decay. Outside the grimy window, the neon sign of the motel flickered, revealing a long-forgotten past. I realized with dawning horror that I wasn't just a visitor in this space. I was a part of it. As I wandered through the desolate corridors of this spectral motel, memories began to resurface, memories I had no idea I possessed. Faces from the faded photograph, including the man in the gray suit, began to materialize around me. They whispered secrets of a long-forgotten tragedy, a fire that had claimed the lives of many, including those who once sought refuge within these walls. The motel had been abandoned decades ago after a series of mysterious disappearances and untimely deaths. I recalled that the photograph in the closet bore the year 1932, an era when the motel was alive with souls, now forever trapped in its cursed history. The shocking twist unfolded as I realized that the motel room I had sought refuge in wasn't a modern safe haven. It was a portal to the past, a liminal space where the souls of those lost were doomed to relive their final moments. And I, through some inexplicable twist of fate, had become entangled in their endless cycle. The figure that had been my reflection now revealed its true nature. It was not an imposter, but my own specter, an echo of the man I had been before fate intertwined with the motel's dark history. I remembered fragments of another life, promises made in desperate whispers, deals struck in the twilight of life, bargains with forces unseen. The motel, it seemed, had been waiting for me all along. I was not just a victim of circumstance, I was its key. As the spectral figures closed in, the man in the gray suit approached me with a solemn nod. His voice, now clear and resonant, filled the silence. "Welcome back," he intoned, "to where it all began. The deal you made, the price you paid, you were bound to this place, to us, for all eternity." In that surreal instant, the truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. Every sleepless drive, every chilling encounter, was not a series of random hauntings, but the threads of a preordained tapestry. I was meant to come here, to confront the past I'd long tried to escape. The realization was both liberating and damning. The weight of a forgotten life, full of secrets and unfulfilled promises, pressed upon me. The room, the motel, the eerie reflections, they were all manifestations of a curse that stretched across decades. I was the inheritor of that curse, destined to wander these halls alongside the lost souls who had been forsaken. My heart pounded as I tried to accept this fate, yet the truth was undeniable. I had made a bargain with forces beyond mortal comprehension. I had sacrificed my chance at a normal life in exchange for something I could no longer remember. As the ghostly figures gathered around, their eyes pleading for recognition, the air grew heavy with sorrow and regret. The spectral version of myself reached out, merging with the living me, and in that final, shattering moment of self-realization, I understood. I was both the savior and the condemned. A cold, spectral hand rested on my shoulder as the figures faded into the background, leaving me alone in that ancient room, a room that existed both in the present and in the annals of a tragic history. I was left with nothing but the echo of their voices and the chilling knowledge that I could never leave. The motel had claimed me, body and soul, in an unexpected twist of fate that blurred the lines between the living and the dead. I sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the enormity of the revelation, realizing that my life had always been intertwined with this forsaken place. The motel was more than a refuge. It was a prison of memories, a trap set long ago by forces I could neither understand nor escape. And as the first light of dawn began to seep through the broken window, I accepted that my fate was sealed. I was now an eternal resident of a past that would never die, forever wandering in a nightmare that had claimed me long before I ever set foot in that haunted motel. Story 2. The highway stretched endlessly before me, flanked on either side by dense forest. The road was a lonely strip of blacktop cutting through the dark wilderness, and the only company I had was the occasional 18-wheeler roaring past, its headlights swallowing me for a brief moment before disappearing into the void. I was on my way home from a weekend with friends, driving through a stretch of rural highway that barely registered on my GPS. I had taken this route before, but tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned in a little too close, or how the radio kept slipping into static no matter what station I tried. My fuel gauge blinked low, forcing me to find a gas station before I ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere. I pulled up my GPS, but the nearest station was still several miles away. Just as I was about to resign myself to a long, nerve-wracking drive, I spotted the glowing neon sign of an old gas station up ahead. It sat alone in the middle of nowhere, its cracked pavement and flickering lights suggesting it hadn't seen an update in decades. The overhead lights buzzed with a faint hum, casting long, distorted shadows over the lot. A single pickup truck was parked at one of the pumps, its rusted exterior gleaming dully under the lights. A man stood beside it, pumping gas. He turned his head slightly as I pulled in, his gaze lingering a little too long. Something about him made my stomach tighten. His face was too pale under the artificial lights, and his eyes, though I couldn't see them clearly, seemed sunken, hollow. I quickly parked at the farthest pump and stepped out, keeping my head down as I swiped my card. As I filled the tank, I could feel the man's gaze on me. I made a point not to look, but the weight of his stare made my skin crawl. I finished pumping gas as fast as I could and walked toward the small convenience store. I needed coffee, anything to keep me alert for the rest of the drive. The inside of the store was just as outdated as the exterior, dusty shelves, old refrigerators humming loudly, and a flickering fluorescent light that barely illuminated the narrow aisles. A bored-looking attendant stood behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. I grabbed a cup of coffee, paid in cash, and hurried out. But as soon as I stepped outside, I felt it again, that same unsettling weight of being watched. The man in the pickup truck was gone. His vehicle still sat at the pump, keys dangling in the ignition, driver's side door left wide open. I glanced around, scanning the dimly lit lot. He was nowhere to be seen. Something was wrong. I felt the urge to just go, to get in my car and leave, but curiosity held me there for a moment longer. That's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel behind me. I spun around, my breath hitching in my throat. But the lot was empty. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the trees. My heart pounded. Had I imagined it? Then, a new sound, a faint tapping. It was coming from my car. I turned slowly. My breath caught in my chest. The man from the pickup truck was now sitting in my back seat. His face was turned toward me, his sunken eyes locked onto mine through the window. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my coffee. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from the car, but I was frozen in place, my legs locked in sheer terror. Then, in a blink, he was gone. The back seat was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears. I swore he had been there. I had seen his pale face, those hollow eyes, hadn't I? I slowly approached my car, my hands trembling as I reached for the door handle. I yanked it open, peered inside. Nothing. Just my bag on the seat, my jacket draped over the console. No sign of him. I let out a shuddering breath and forced a nervous laugh. I was exhausted. That had to be it. Long drive, too much caffeine, too little sleep. It was making my mind play tricks on me. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and took a moment to steady myself. That's when I noticed something new. My fuel gauge. It still read empty, but I had just filled my tank. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. I had just watched the numbers go up at the pump, hadn't I? I hesitantly turned the key in the ignition. The car rumbled to life, but the low fuel warning blinked again. A sick, twisting feeling settled in my stomach. Then I saw him again, standing at the edge of the trees. His body was unnaturally still, just barely visible in the shadows. I slammed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement as I peeled out of the lot. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged as I sped back onto the highway. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see him sitting in the back seat again. But there was nothing, just the empty stretch of road behind me. I tried to focus on driving, to convince myself that it was just exhaustion messing with my head. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And then, the final twist. My GPS recalibrated itself. At first, I was relieved, thinking it was finally going to lead me back to the main highway. But when I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was directing me back to the gas station. A chill ran through me. My hands tightened on the wheel. No, I wasn't going back there. I manually typed in my home address, ignoring the automated voice telling me to turn around. But every time I hit start route, the destination changed. Back to the gas station. My pulse pounded. I turned off the GPS, but the moment I did, my dashboard lights flickered. The entire car shuddered. And then, the radio turned on by itself. Static filled the cabin. Then, a voice. Low, raspy, almost a whisper. You forgot to pay for your gas. I slammed the brakes. My entire body was shaking now. My hands hovered over the steering wheel, too terrified to move. The static on the radio crackled, shifting, distorting. Then, for a single, horrifying moment, I heard breathing. Inside the car, I killed the engine. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I sat motionless in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The radio had gone silent, but the weight of that voice still lingered in the air. You forgot to pay for your gas. But I had. I knew I had. I swiped my card. I pumped the gas. I I looked at my fuel gauge again. Still empty. A cold sweat broke over my skin. I needed to get away from here. I reached for my phone, but the screen was frozen, stuck on the GPS app flashing "Return to gas station" in bold letters. My thumb jabbed at the power button, but the phone wouldn't shut off. The air inside the car grew heavy, stifling, as if the atmosphere itself was thickening. Then, from the rearview mirror, a movement. Slow, deliberate. Something was in the back seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My muscles locked in place as my breath shallowed to near nothingness. The hair on the back of my neck rose as I felt it. Breath. Slow, measured exhalations that weren't mine, warming the back of my ear. Then, a whisper. Drive. My stomach lurched. My instincts screamed to run, to throw the door open and bolt into the woods, but some deeper, primal terror told me that if I left the car, I wouldn't make it far. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and gripped the gear shift with trembling fingers. The engine groaned to life as I peeled away, tires kicking up loose gravel as I fled down the road. I risked a glance at the mirror. The back seat was empty. My pulse thundered in my ears. Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion finally caught up with me? I gritted my teeth and forced my focus on the road. The trees on either side blurred together, forming a tunnel of darkness. The headlights barely seemed to cut through it, the beams swallowed by the void. I drove for miles, but no matter how far I went, the fuel gauge never moved. The needle stayed pinned at empty. And then, up ahead, through the gloom, the gas station. The same flickering neon sign. The same rusted truck parked at the pump. My stomach twisted violently. I stomped on the brakes, but the car wouldn't stop. The pedal sank to the floor, as if the brakes had been severed. My speed barely slowed as I rolled into the station, tires grinding against the pavement. The gas station hadn't changed. It was exactly as I had left it. A figure stood under the buzzing light near the entrance. The man. Same pale face. Same hollowed-out eyes. Waiting for me. I could barely breathe as I stepped out of the car, my legs weak, my body shaking. The man didn't move as I approached, didn't even blink. The gas station door creaked open behind him, and the dim interior beckoned like the mouth of something hungry. I didn't want to go inside, but I knew somehow that I had to. I stepped through the threshold, the bell above the door giving a weak, warbled chime. The inside of the gas station was eerily silent, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing faintly. The clerk from earlier was gone. The store was empty, except... I frowned. There was a man at the counter. Not the same clerk. This one was older, with deep-set eyes and skin that looked gray, like old parchment. His hands rested flat on the counter, fingers too long, nails yellowed and cracked. He smiled. A slow, knowing smile that sent ice-cold dread shooting through my veins. Forgot something? He rasped. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to turn and leave, to get in my car and never look back. But I didn't move. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet, hands trembling. I wasn't even sure what I was doing, just running on autopilot, following some unwritten rule I didn't understand. I pulled out a $1 bill, and the moment it touched the counter, the store vanished. Not in an instant, not like flipping a switch. It peeled away, the shelves, the floor, the counter, the walls, melting into something else, something wrong. I was standing in a different place. No gas station, no store, just a vast, empty landscape. The sky above was pitch black, starless, the air thick with the scent of rot. The only source of light came from a row of street lamps stretching into the distance. They flickered intermittently, barely illuminating the cracked pavement beneath them. I turned, but the gas station was gone. My car gone. The pale man? Standing beside me. His eyes, once sunken and void, were now pitch black. His mouth twisted into something that barely resembled a human expression. You've been here before, he murmured. I shook my head, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, I've never. He tilted his head. Are you sure? And then he held something out. A photograph. My blood turned to ice as I took it with trembling fingers. The image was old, black and white, the edges frayed. A man stood in front of the gas station. He was wearing my clothes. He had my face. But the picture was dated 60 years ago. My vision swam. My breath hitched. My hands, they were shaking. The man leaned in closer. His breath was cold against my cheek. You've been running for a long time, he whispered. But it always brings you back. I dropped the photograph and ran. I didn't know where I was going. There was no car, no roads, just the flickering street lamps stretching into the darkness. But I ran. The lights blinked out one by one behind me, swallowed by the endless black. The pavement beneath me cracked and crumbled with every step. The air grew thick, too heavy to breathe. And then, I tripped, fell hard onto the pavement. My knees scraped raw. My palms stung. I gasped, pushing myself up. But the ground beneath me wasn't pavement anymore. It was gravel, concrete. I was back at the gas station. The neon sign buzzed faintly above me. The clerk stood behind the counter, flipping through his magazine like nothing had happened. My car was parked by the pump, the fuel gauge now full. And in my clenched fist, the photograph. The ink had begun to fade. I backed away, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. I had to leave. I had to get out of here. I climbed into my car, turned the key, and peeled away, not daring to look back. But as I merged onto the highway, the radio flickered on by itself. A familiar voice, low and knowing. "See you next time," I screamed. But the voice only laughed. Story 3. The snow had been falling for hours, thick and heavy, reducing visibility to almost nothing. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulating frost, and the roads were coated in a layer of slick ice. The storm had come in faster than expected, swallowing the highway in white, and every mile I drove felt more dangerous than the last. I had been on the road for nearly 6 hours, making my way to my boyfriend Todd's place in a neighboring state. We had been doing long distance for almost a year now, and since I had a week off work, I figured I'd drive up to spend it with him. The plan had been simple: leave early, beat the worst of the snow. But plans never go how they're supposed to. The snowstorm had turned a routine drive into a nightmare, and I had been forced to slow to a crawl. I was gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Todd had called me a few times, checking in, telling me to just stop somewhere for the night. But I was stubborn. I didn't want to waste money on some rundown roadside motel, not when I was this close. But as the storm worsened, it became clear that I didn't have a choice. I squinted at my GPS, trying to find the closest town, but the screen was frozen. The route hadn't updated in nearly 20 minutes, the blinking blue arrow stuck in place despite me still moving forward. I tapped the screen, swiped at it, but it wouldn't respond. That's when I saw the lights up ahead. A single glowing sign, flickering in the blizzard. A motel. I didn't recognize the name. It wasn't on my GPS, and I was pretty sure it hadn't been on any billboards earlier. But right now, I wasn't about to be picky. I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching against thick snow. There were only 2 other cars parked outside, both half buried in white, their windshields iced over. No tire tracks leading in or out. I frowned. That was strange. I shoved the thought aside and grabbed my overnight bag. The cold hit me like a hammer the second I stepped out of the car, the wind howling like a living thing. I hurried toward the entrance, my boots sinking into the drifts. The lobby was eerily quiet, dimly lit. The man behind the counter barely looked up as I approached. He was pale, his eyes dark and sunken, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You're lucky," he murmured, sliding a key across the desk. "Last room available." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the uneasy twist in my stomach. "How much for the night?" He just shook his head. "No charge." I blinked. "What?" The man finally met my eyes. His pupils were too big, swallowing the color of his irises. "You're already checked in," he said. A cold shudder crawled down my spine. My hand hovered over the key, hesitant. I hadn't given him my name. I hadn't even taken out my wallet. But maybe he meant something else. Maybe they had some kind of winter storm policy, offering free rooms to stranded travelers. That was logical. That made sense. I told myself that as I took the key and hurried toward my room. The hallway was long and silent. The carpet was worn, the wallpaper peeling. Every few feet, a wall sconce flickered with dim yellow light, casting strange shadows across the floor. The entire motel felt wrong, like I had stepped into something abandoned and forgotten. I found my room at the very end of the hall, room 206. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room was freezing. The radiator in the corner was off, and the window was slightly open, allowing the wind to hiss through. The bed was neatly made, the lamp beside it glowing faintly. And then I saw them. Footprints, leading from the window. My breath caught in my throat. The snow outside was falling too heavily for someone to have climbed in recently. The tracks were dry, pressed deep into the carpet. Whoever had made them had been here for a while. My pulse pounded in my ears. I scanned the room, looking for any signs that someone was still here. The closet door was slightly ajar. The bathroom door, too. I wasn't alone. I stepped back, heart hammering, ready to turn and bolt for the lobby, when the closet door creaked open. Slowly, deliberately, a figure stepped out. My blood turned to ice. It was a woman, wearing my clothes. I stumbled backward, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. The woman, my exact reflection, down to the boots, the bag slung over her shoulder, tilted her head at me. Then she smiled, and in my voice, she whispered, "Took you long enough." I screamed. I scrambled for the door, but my hands wouldn't move. My body was frozen in place, every muscle locked in terror. The woman took a slow step forward, her smile widening. "I was waiting for you," she said softly. "Didn't think you'd take this route again." Again? She reached into her bag, my bag, and pulled out a photo. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't look away. The picture was old, yellowed at the edges. It showed the motel, the same dim lights, the same peeling wallpaper, and standing in front of room 206. Me, but not me now. Me from years ago. The woman, the other me, tilted her head. "You don't remember, do you?" I shook my head, terrified to speak. She let out a soft sigh, like she had expected that answer. Then she gestured to the bed, and that's when I saw the other body. A corpse. My corpse. Lying still and cold on the motel bed, the sheets stained with dark, dried blood. The world tilted violently. My head spun. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But it was. And the woman, my reflection, my double, my ghost, sighed again. "You didn't make it last time," she murmured. "Let's see if you do this time." She took a step forward. And then, everything went black. I woke up with the taste of iron in my mouth. My head throbbed as I pushed myself up, my limbs sluggish, my vision blurry. The motel room was dim, the flickering lamp casting long, unnatural shadows across the walls. For a moment, I couldn't move, like my body wasn't my own, like something had wedged itself between me and reality. Then I saw it. The bed. The corpse was still there. My corpse. A strangled noise escaped my throat as I stumbled back, my breath coming in frantic gasps. My body, pale, lifeless, unmoving, lay sprawled across the sheets, dried blood staining my clothes. The air smelled of decay, of something long dead. I turned wildly, searching for the other me, the woman who had stepped out of the closet wearing my clothes. But she was gone. A sickening thought twisted in my gut. Had she taken my place? I rushed to the mirror above the dresser, desperate to see my reflection. The breath left my lungs. The mirror was empty. No reflection. No me. Panic surged through me like wildfire. I pressed my hands against the glass, but the surface was cold, as if I wasn't really there. My chest tightened, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was something else. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned, pulse pounding, as the closet door creaked open again. This time, something stepped out that wasn't me. It was him, the man from the lobby. His hollow eyes gleamed in the dim light, his face a mask of something unreadable. He stood unnaturally still, the dark shadows stretching from his feet like roots burrowing into the floor. "You should have stayed on the road," he murmured. His voice was flat, emotionless, like something unused to speaking. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my throat was dry, my words trapped in my chest. He took a step closer. "This place is a loop," he continued. "You were never supposed to leave. And now..." His lips curled slightly, but the expression was wrong, like he was mimicking something he didn't understand. "Now you don't exist at all." I shook my head violently. No, this wasn't happening. I lunged for the door, but my hand passed through the knob. A choked sob escaped my throat. I tried again, grasping, clawing, but my fingers only met empty air. I wasn't real anymore. A memory surfaced, jagged and broken. I had been here before, but I had forgotten. The storm, the motel, the loop. I had checked in once before, and I had never left. The man took another step forward. "You don't remember what happened the first time, do you?" I staggered back, my breathing frantic. My mind spun, grasping for something, anything. But then, the room flickered. For the briefest moment, I wasn't in the motel anymore. I was outside, standing in the blizzard, my car buried in the snow, my fingers numb as I gripped the wheel. Headlights cutting through the storm. The motel's neon sign glowing in the distance. I had been dying. I had never made it to the motel. My chest constricted as the memories slammed into me. I had pulled off the road because the snow had become too heavy. My car had slid into a ditch, the wheels spinning uselessly. I had gotten out, tried to walk, tried to make it here, but I had collapsed. I had frozen to death before I ever reached the motel, and the moment I realized it, the walls vanished. I was standing in the middle of the road. Snow swirled around me in thick, chaotic gusts, the wind howling through the trees. My car was still there, half buried, engine dead, windows frosted over. And up ahead? The motel. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an inviting glow against the storm. For a moment, I almost moved toward it, almost let my legs carry me back to the warmth. Then I saw them. The cars in the lot, buried under decades of snow. And the motel windows, dark and empty, except for the figures standing inside. I knew then, the motel had never been real. It had always been waiting for people like me. People who got lost in the storm. People who froze to death on the highway, their bodies never found, their souls wandering into the illusion of shelter. That was the loop. A place for the forgotten dead. The man from the lobby was still watching me, standing at the entrance, waiting, his face impassive. If I stepped forward, if I checked in again, I would be trapped forever. My breath shuddered. I turned and ran. The snowstorm swallowed me whole. My body burned with cold, but I pushed forward, my feet stumbling through the drifts. I had to get back to my car. The motel door creaked open behind me. A whisper on the wind. Come back inside. I ignored it. Then footsteps. Not mine. Something was following me. I didn't dare look back. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept moving. The car was just ahead, just a few more feet. And then, the headlights came on. For a brief, blinding moment, the snow glowed. I saw the figure behind me, the other me, standing in the storm, face pale, lips frozen blue, smiling. Then the lights flickered, and I was in the driver's seat. My fingers locked around the wheel, the engine rumbling beneath me. The windshield was clear. The road stretched ahead. The motel was gone. No lights, no sign, just an endless stretch of dark highway. My chest heaved as I gripped the wheel. I had made it. This time, I had made it. With shaking hands, I started the car and pulled onto the road. The storm had eased, the snow falling gently now. But as I drove, a final whisper echoed through the radio. See you next time. The temperature in the car plummeted, and in the rearview mirror, a shape sat in the back seat.